Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Let's recap the week with keywords that made headlines this week. The Constitutional Court wrapped up a total of 11 rounds of hearings for President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial this week. Now, the ruling is expected to come around mid-March. Both the birth rate and fertility rate in South Korea in 2024 went up for the first time in 9 years. More marriages during the post-pandemic years and supportive measures drove the rise. The Bank of Korea lowered the key lending rate to 2.75% from the previous 3% in an effort to shore up the economy. The final hearing of President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial wrapped up this week, and the Constitutional Court began deliberations. To delve deeper into the recent hearing and what lies ahead, we have our political correspondent Shin-Young here in the studio. Welcome, Ha-young.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ha-young, walk us through the very last hearing of President Yoon Suk-yeol's hearing back on Tuesday.
So, the 11th and final impeachment hearing came 73 days after the National Assembly passed the impeachment motion following President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration. And as the final speakers in his trial, President Yoon on Tuesday defended his actions, insisting that his call for martial law was a one-off plea to the public during what he described as a state of emergency caused by legislative obstruction and budget cuts from the opposition party. Take a listen.
지난 2년 반 동안 오로지 대통령 끌어내리기를 목표로 정부 공직자 줄탄핵 그리고 입법과 예산 폭거를 계속해 왔습니다. 헌법이 정한 정당한 견제와 균형이 아니라 민주적 정당성의 상징인 직선 대통령 끌어내리기 공작을 그야말로 쉼 없이 해온 것입니다.
He also pledged to push for political reform and more effective governance through constitutional amendments if he were to resume his duties. And despite his firm stance, Yoon apologized for the confusion and inconvenience caused by his martial law declaration. And the National Assembly's impeachment panel co-chair Jung Chung-lee delivered his final statement in front of Yoon, saying that the public had already rejected Yoon and urged the court to uphold the impeachment. Take a listen.
President Yoon took the oath of office to uphold the Constitution and defend the nation. Yet he sent martial law troops to invade the National Assembly and trampled on the Constitution. The respondent no longer has the qualifications to remain as president. He is no longer the president in the hearts of the people.
And starting Wednesday, the Constitutional Court justices decided to hold deliberations every day except holidays and weekends until the verdict is delivered.
Now, all that's left, it's a court's verdict, which is expected this month, March. But when exactly will that happen, Ha-young?
Well, Tammy, the date hasn't been set yet, but based on past presidential impeachment trials, the verdict is expected to come out around mid-March after about 2 weeks of deliberations. So some say between March 10th and 14th. And for the late former President Roh Moo-hyun, the court dismissed the impeachment motion 14 days after the final hearing, while it took 11 days for former President Park Geun-hye's verdict to be delivered. And the court usually announces the date just a few days before, and this time it's also likely to be confirmed 2 to 3 days in advance as well.
Ha-young, speaking of the timing of the verdict, the court also ruled on acting President Choi Sang-mok's non-appointment of a justice nominee. Tell us more.
You're right. It's one of the factors that we need to consider when it comes to the timeline for the verdict on the Yoon's impeachment. And the Constitutional Court on Thursday ruled that acting President Choi Sang-mok's decision to withhold the appointment of Justice nominee Ma Eun-hyuk was unconstitutional, violating the National Assembly's authority to select Constitutional Court justices. Take a listen to what acting Chief Justice Moon Young-bae said.
The non-appointment of Justice candidate Ma Eun-hyuk infringes upon the petitioner's right to participate in the Constitutional Court's composition through the election of a court justice as granted by the Constitution.
At the same time, the court dismissed the request from the National Assembly Speaker to confirm Ma's status as a justice or order his immediate appointment, citing legal limitations. And Che had appointed 2 out of 3 justices put forward by the Assembly in December last year, but deferred Ma Eun-hyuk's appointment, calling for bipartisan agreement first. And now all eyes are on when Che will appoint Ma as a Constitutional Court justice. The Assembly Speaker and opposition Democratic Party are calling for the immediate appointment, but there's no legal way to force it. And Che's office said the acting president would respect the court's decision and would carefully look into the verdict, but couldn't comment on if or when Ma would be appointed. And if Ma Eun-hyuk is appointed before the Constitutional Court's ruling on Yoon's impeachment, the court will have to decide whether Ma will join the case. And if it doesn't, the court will proceed with 8 justices, and the verdict will likely come around mid-March as expected. But if he participates, the court would have to decide whether Ma should conduct a brief review of trial materials or hold a retrial process, which involves a more comprehensive examination with more hearings. So the latter could significantly delay the ruling.
And Hayoung, a day after Yoon's final hearing, opposition leader Lee Jae-myung's final hearing was also held in an appellate court, over his election law violation charges. Let's talk about that.
Well, indeed, the final appellate trial hearing for main opposition Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung's violation of the Public Official Election Act was held on Wednesday at the Seoul High Court.
What is meant by the world will follow common sense and principles. The court will make the right decision.
Prosecutors demanded a 2-year prison term for Lee, and Lee was indicted on charges of making false statements in December 2021 during a media interview where he denied knowing a man involved in a land development scandal in Seongnam. And he's also accused of having made false claims that there was pressure from South Korea's land ministry to rezone a research institute site in the Baekhyun-dong area. And in the original verdict, the Seoul Central District Court ruled that Lee had spread false information while disputing corruption allegations during his presidential campaign and handed him a 1-year prison sentence suspended for 2 years.
Then the question is, how will Lee's trial affect the political landscape going forward?
Well, the first thing we need to think about is that if the Constitutional Court upholds the motion to impeach President Yoon, there will be an early presidential election within 60 days. Then the speed of the Supreme Court's review on Lee's case could become a crucial factor in Lee's presidential ambitions. And if the first ruling stands, Lee will lose his legislative seat and be barred from running in elections for 10 years. And the decision on his appeal is scheduled to come on March 26th. However, there is a variable. In February, he filed a request with the appellate court for a constitutional review seeking a ruling on the constitutionality of relevant legal provisions. And if the court accepts the request, the trial will be suspended until the Constitutional Court issues a ruling. And so far, the appellate court has yet to make a decision on this request. And key verdicts are expected in March, so we should keep an eye on how Lee's trial and Yoon's impeachment trial could reshape the political landscape.
Alrighty, Hayoung, thank you for that thorough wrap-up today.
Thank you.
South Korea and the Trump administration have agreed to use the expression the denuclearization of North Korea instead of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
Seoul and Washington have agreed to use the term denuclearization of North Korea instead of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula when addressing the North Korean nuclear issue. South Korean ambassador to the U.S., Cho Hyun-dong, made this announcement during a monthly meeting of South Korean correspondents in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. As Seoul does not have nuclear weapons, the two expressions largely convey the same purpose of dismantling Pyongyang's nuclear program. However, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula holds the broader meaning of not only ridding North Korea of its nuclear program, but also the possibility of South Korea going nuclear or hosting U.S. tactical nuclear weapons. To make the meaning clearer, Second Trump administration has decided to use the expression the denuclearization of North Korea in a consistent manner. Following the agreement, Seoul's top envoy to the U.S. added that the term was used in documents issued during high-level meetings, including the U.S.-Japan summit and the trilateral foreign ministers meeting between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Meanwhile, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan raised voices together at a UN conference on disarmament in Geneva, condemning North Korea's military provocations and calling for its complete denuclearization, while pointing out that Pyongyang is continuing its reckless provocations in blatant violation of relevant UN Security Council resolutions. The three countries said the international community is resolute that Pyongyang will never have the status of a nuclear weapon state. The North Korean representative dismissed the statement, calling it outdated and meaningless. Calling denuclearization an absurd fantasy, he blamed U.S. and its allies' military actions as main cause of instability on the peninsula, and said that North Korea's status as a full-fledged nuclear state will remain an undeniable reality. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Also this week, the U.S. House of Representatives has reintroduced a bill calling for the end of the Korean War and the signing of a peace treaty. Democratic Congressman Brett Sherman held a press conference on Wednesday where he announced that he resubmitted the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. The bill calls on the U.S. Secretary of State to make diplomatic efforts with the two Koreas to achieve a peace treaty that finally brings the Korean War to an end. It also calls for a roadmap for achieving those goals. The bill further calls for Washington and Pyongyang to negotiate the establishment of liaison offices in each other's capitals and a comprehensive review of travel bans against North Korea. Now, a total of 33 House members co-sponsored the bill. Policymakers at South Korea's central bank decided to cut their key lending rate to revitalize the local economy. They also lowered the growth rate for the year. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
South Korea's central bank has lowered its benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points as widely expected, bringing it down to 2.75%. The decision was announced on Tuesday following the second Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year, resuming its rate-cutting cycle after two consecutive rate cuts in October and November last year, followed by a pause in January.
The committee today determined that while concerns in the foreign exchange market remain, a further rate cut was necessary to support the economy, as inflation is stabilizing, household debt growth is slowing, and signs of a significant slowdown are becoming more evident.
The central bank's decision reflects its growing concerns over South Korea's rapidly slowing economy, weighed down by both domestic and global challenges. Global trade uncertainties heightened by U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff hikes and continued political turmoil following the martial law declaration last December led the central bank to also slash its economic growth projection for 2025. Lowering its forecast for GDP growth this year by 0.4 percentage points to 1.5%. It's the first time since 2022 that the BOK has revised its projection by such a large amount. Its projection for 2026 remains unchanged, as does its outlook for consumer price inflation this year. This falls in line with forecasts from other major economic institutions such as the Korea Development Institute, which also lowered its 2025 forecast from 2% to 1.6%. South Korea's real GDP growth in 2024 came in at just 2%, falling short of the central bank's earlier forecast of 2.2%, as weak consumer spending and sluggish construction investment were further exacerbated by the domestic political crisis. The rate cut is seen as an effort to counteract economic headwinds by boosting domestic consumption and investment and preventing a steeper downturn.
I don't think you'll see any results within the next few months, and that's because there's a usual time lag between lowering the interest rate and what you see in the markets. So I think if we want to see the full effect from the interest rate cut, we need to have supplementary budget spending quickly.
However, concerns remain. The widening interest rate gap between the US and South Korea, now at 1.75 percentage points, raises the risks of capital outflow, which could further weaken the Korean won and push inflation higher. 문혜련, Arirang News.
South Korean authorities are easing greenbelt restrictions for the first time in nearly 2 decades as part of efforts to spur business investment. Our Choi Soo-hyung has this report.
Greenbelt restrictions will be lifted for some areas of the country for the first time since 2008.
For the first time in 17 years since 2008, more greenbelt land can be released. This will actively support national and regional industrial, logistics, and urban projects.
In the 5-grade greenbelt system, the government will allow the release of grade 1 and 2 areas holding high conservation value. These areas were not originally eligible for deregulation, but will be permitted only if alternative greenbelt areas are designated. With this deregulation, the government plans to attract more business investments in the regions. The goal is to develop 15 key regional projects in major cities across the country, excluding the Seoul metropolitan area. The cities of Changwon and Ulsan, which had a high proportion of grade 1 and 2 greenbelt areas, were selected for 4 and 3 sites, respectively. Gwangju and Busan each received 3 sites, while Daejeon and Daegu were allocated 1 site each. More than 10 out of the 15 selected locations will be used for industrial and logistics complexes. The total area set to be released is 42 square kilometers, equivalent to about 5,900 football fields. 35% of that are grades 1 and 2, and the government plans to consider publicly owned land as alternative sites. The total project will cost 27.8 trillion Korean won, approximately $19.4 billion. After the development procedures are completed, the deregulation will proceed gradually starting next year. To prevent real estate speculation, these areas will be designated as land transaction permit zones, meaning any land transactions would require prior approval. Moreover, the government will launch a 1 trillion won fund for 12 national strategic technologies, including semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and advanced biotechnology. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
The number of births last year in South Korea rose for the first time in 9 years, marking a rare and encouraging shift in the nation's long-suffering demographic crisis. Here is the data from Statistics Korea on Wednesday. There were 238,300 of births in 2024. That's up 3.6% compared to the previous year. This marks the first time since 2015 that the number of births in Korea saw an on-year increase. And the nation's total fertility rate, that's the average number of children a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, that also rose for the first time in 9 years to 0.75 after it fell to its lowest annual figure of 0.72 in 2023.
This shift is driven by the post-COVID-19 rise in marriages and an increase in the population of women in their 30s. A survey also shows that compared to 2 years ago, attitudes toward childbirth and parenting have become somewhat more positive.
In fact, with the number of marriages last year coming to 222,422, the highest recorded since 2019, the number of births may continue to see an upward tick this year. The positive shift also comes as the government implemented various policies last year, such as extending the duration of parental leave. And to sustain this positive rise in birth figures, according to the country's senior presidential secretary, the government will address policy gaps in childcare and housing while supporting families with multiple children. Korea's southern port city of Busan hosted an annual drone show that marks its 10th birthday this year, with much emphasis on drones for defense. Our business correspondent Moon Hae-ryun was there.
When you think of a drone, what image comes to mind? For many, it's a small full-propeller device hovering in the air. But what truly defines a drone is not its shape or size. It's the fact that it operates without a pilot on board. This makes drones invaluable across various sectors, a point underscored at Drone Show Korea 2025, Asia's largest drone exhibition. Marking its 10th anniversary this year, the event placed a strong emphasis on the growing role of drones in defense and security, as these unmanned systems become increasingly central to modern warfare. The wars in Ukraine and Gaza have underscored the growing importance of drones in modern warfare, and South Korea is also ramping up its use of drone technology within its military. The Republic of Korea Army showcased surveillance drones designed for reconnaissance missions, while the Republic of Korea Navy unveiled unmanned underwater vehicles capable of navigating restricted and high-risk areas. The Air Force showed its vision for unmanned systems integrated with artificial intelligence, where drones can reduce casualties and address manpower shortages with the country's declining birth rate.
This manned and unmanned combat aircraft system enhances pilot survivability, maximizes operational efficiency, and enables a single aircraft to carry out the missions of 6 or 7 units. As a result, it is considered a game changer in future warfare. Recognizing its strategic importance, South Korea is investing significant effort and resources into its development.
South Korean drones are also gaining popularity around the world, such as in Southeast Asia as they search for alternatives to cheap Chinese drones, with security issues becoming more prominent. This company not only develops surveillance and attack drones for the Korean army, but also exports smaller drones to the Philippines, where they're used to make the streets safer. Delivery drones that are capable of lifting heavy equipment to high altitudes are also popular overseas, with this company supplying them to film sets in Hollywood and to the Jordanian armed forces.
The face of future warfare is beginning to change as drones become increasingly more autonomous and able to carry out a variety of functions. 문혜련, Arirang News.
This year, Korea marks 115 years since the execution of independence hero An Jung-geun, whose faith in freedom for Korea fueled his fight against Japanese occupation and its atrocities. A memorial museum bearing his name is reopening its doors in time for the weekend's March 1st Independence Movement Day. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more.
An independence fighter who cut off the tip of his left ring finger with 11 others as a symbol of sacrifice to their nation. A patriot who assassinated Japanese General Ito Hirobumi, firing 3 bullets into his chest and abdomen in Harbin before being executed at Lushan prison. Marking the 115th anniversary of his death, the An Jung-geun Memorial Museum held a reopening ceremony on Wednesday. An expanded range of digital exhibits is part of the Patriots Ministry's efforts to renew the memorial museums of Korea's patriots. Yoon Bong-gil, An Jung-geun, and Baekbom Kim-gu, commemorating the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation.
Through introducing the latest digital content and immersive video rooms, visitors can now experience the life and independence movement of Patriot An Jung-geun in a more vivid and interactive way.
An's commitment to the Enlightenment movement in Korea, his role in the Righteous Army movement, along with his long journey are well shown throughout the exhibition. But of course, the most noticeable part of the renewed exhibition is how it digitized major historical moments and lessons An left.
If you put your hand on An's handprint with his fingers cut off, it turns on the video on the wall, showing An pulling the trigger of his pistol to assassinate Ito Hirobumi, letting visitors feel the atmosphere at that moment.
The museum recreated the courtroom as well, where An explains why he shot Ito, citing 15 reasons based on trial records. In the reproduced video, An also talks about a treatise on peace in the East, which he wrote while at Lushan prison until his execution on March 26, 1910.
I have always thought it has been difficult to convey why An Jung-geun shot Ito, the meaning behind it, and the ideals and dreams he envisioned. Through the renewal, I hope people will be able to easily understand An's advanced philosophy on peace.
People will be able to enjoy the renewed An Jung-geun Memorial Museum starting March 1st, Independence Movement Day.
김보경, Arirang News.
South Korea is home to many K-pop stars and artists. Now the country is on the hunt to cultivate and foster conductors who will lead the field of classical music. Our Song Yujin has more.
Inside this hall, the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra is full in rehearsal. But today, a new face leads the podium, under the watchful eye of a familiar one, music director Jaap van Zweden. The orchestra has opened its doors to rising conductors through the 2025 SPO Jaap van Zweden Conducting Fellowship. Here, the baton isn't just passed, it's being earned.
To be in front of an orchestra and be with them and work with them is a complete different experience than preparing this in a room when you are alone or just with a pianist.
The 8 young conductors selected through an open audition work closely with Korea's top orchestra for 3 days.
So one, two, three, and then 4, 5, 6. 4 is 4, 5, 6. 4 is 5, 6.
Van Zweden focused on 3 key skills: mastering the smallest detail, knowing when and why to stop the orchestra, and most importantly, how to fix something that's gone wrong.
But we always have to learn that the power is with the orchestra and not with us. We just bring out all the potential. Orchestra don't want to have authority by just being an authority, but they want to see the authority of knowledge, what you know about how to fix things.
These young conductors have already built impressive careers, working with orchestras across Europe and the US and training at top music schools. Yet they seized this chance to grow, because in music, as in life, there's always more to learn.
It's really special that the Maestro took the time to praise us. As young conductors, we need that encouragement. It gives us the confidence to push ourselves further. He doesn't overlook that.
Most master classes last for just a day. This program is on a whole other level. We spent an entire week working closely with the music director and rehearsing with the orchestra. Opportunities like this are invaluable.
It's a priceless lesson, freely given, where a legend hands down everything they know, shaping the maestros of tomorrow. Song Yujin, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this weekend. Thank you so much for staying with us and have a wonderful weekend wherever you are.